Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. Today's guest is award-winning journalist and author, A'Lelia Bundles. She's the great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker. Join me now as I go on the aisle for a conversation with A'Lelia. It's so great to see you, Ms. A'Lelia Bundles. How long have we known each other?
Well, I don't know, 20 plus 30 years, something
It's
like that.
gotta be at least
Believe it or not, I was scrolling through some old documents and I saw the picture of Violet Reynolds being interviewed by you for the documentary that you did.
Boy, I have so many fond memories of that time, but we have so much to talk about. And yes, the focus of this podcast is the performing arts, but you are certainly tied to the performing arts by way of your upcoming book. So tell us about that book. First of all, let's talk about it now.
Sure, absolutely. So you and I really met because you had an early interest in Madam C.J. Walker's story, as I have. But in addition to her story, her daughter's story is very interesting. A'Lelia Walker, my great-grandmother, was the person who first interested me, who first intrigued me. And now I have just finished the first major biography of A'Lelia Walker and her life in Harlem during the 1910s and 1920s. So she's very much a central figure of the Harlem Renaissance, which is really about culture and arts.
Absolutely. And during that time, she supported and she entertained and she backed so many of the names of that day. Drop a few of those names.
Well, absolutely. So she converted a floor of her townhouse on 136th Street into the Dark Tower, which was a salon, a cultural salon that brought together the actors and writers and musicians and artists of the time. So she was good friends with Noble Sissle, an Indianapolis-based person. He entertained. She went to his musical Shuffle Along.
And for our listeners, he was a composer and a musician, correct?
That's right. Noble Sissle, very famous composer and musician who grew up in Indianapolis, but who, with U.B. Blake, another famous name, did the music for Shuffle Along in 1921. That was kind of the first major Black musical on Broadway in the 1920s, and it is one of the key markers of the Harlem Renaissance. So she knew Noble Sissle. He had actually entertained at a 1914 party that Madam Walker hosted for A'Lelia Walker. And both women were very interested in the arts from the very beginning. It's something that many people do not know because they think of Madam Walker as a millionaire and they think of A'Lelia Walker as an heiress. But even when they were struggling and very poor, when Madam Walker was still a washerwoman in St. Louis, she was in the choir at St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. She had a good enough voice to be in the choir, though she was a poor washerwoman. And it was in the 1880s and 1890s when they lived there that ragtime was being born. So for a while, they lived across the alley from Tom Turpin's Rosebud Cafe, which is where Scott Joplin practiced and was in competition. So Scott Joplin, for people who don't know him, was really one of the premier composers of ragtime music, which still to this day resonates with people.
So I presume she obviously exposed A'Lelia to the performing arts.
Well, I think it was they were both discovering it together. So Madam Walker in the choir, but A'Lelia Walker as a kid was on the streets of St. Louis, and some of her friends became famous musicians. And interestingly, the schools in St. Louis They were segregated, but the Germans ran the music program. The Germans who had migrated to St. Louis, as they did to Indianapolis, but who had migrated to St. Louis in the 1820s and 1830s, oversaw the music department. Some of the principals of the black elementary schools had gone to Oberlin. They also had been exposed to music. So the children, even though the children were very poor, they were being exposed in school to German lieder, to classical music, to opera. And on the streets, they were being exposed to ragtime and the cakewalk. So where, it's just like, parents and kids have generational differences in what they see now. So Madam Walker might have been singing in the choir, but her daughter was with the other kids on the street and in school, experiencing her own exposure to music and theater.
It's interesting. I should have presumed that Madam Walker supported the arts in general, but performing arts in particular, because by the time she acquired that home on the Hudson River, Villa Lawaro,
Right.
she had educated herself and surrounded herself with the top artist of the day, did she not?
So in 1914, Madam Walker in Indianapolis hosted a spring dance for Alelia Walker, her daughter, who was visiting from New York. In addition to Noble Sissel, who was performing, there was a very well-known operatic diva who was performing. Paul Laurence Dunbar, the famous poet, had died by that time, but his mother came over from Ohio as a guest. And so this was a wonderful dance. It was held at the Knights of Pythias Hall, which is still standing in Indianapolis. And Madam Walker loved to entertain people. She had commissioned art by Edward Scott and John Hardrick, who were local Indianapolis artists. And so they were always infusing music into their lives and into their entertaining. So it wasn't something new for them. They had learned some of this even when they were still poor. So the music theme and the performing arts really carried through from the earliest days through Indianapolis and then in New York. When Alelia Walker moved to Harlem in 1913, she bought a townhouse, really was her mother's money, but a townhouse, and they entertained in the townhouse. And then in 1916, Madam Walker moved to New York. Part of the reason she moved to New York is that she wanted to be more involved in the politics that was going on. She wanted to be a part of the cultural scene in New York City. And New York City had even more going on than Indianapolis at the time. When she built her mansion, Villa Lawaro in Irvington, New York, it was named Lawaro for Lelia Walker Robinson. The person who came up with that name was Enrico Caruso, the famous Italian tenor. And Alelia Walker loved opera. When I was starting to do my research about them and I saw that they'd started going to the opera, I have to admit that I thought, well, maybe isn't this a bit of an affectation? They now have some money, so they're going to the opera. And then in my research, I discovered that African Americans had long been fans of opera. And for people who know opera better than I do, opera was at one point the music of the people, as opposed to the $1,500 ticket that people now have to pay to go see the opera. So there were many Black opera singers. Madam Walker traveled to the Caribbean with a woman who was an opera singer because the opera singers were traveling internationally. She saw that as a way to have entree to this international travel.
And that tradition continues to this day with African American artists that have been working consistently and have been major stars of the stage.
Including folks from Indianapolis.
Miss Angela Brown.
And Miss Brown.
Do you know Angela well?
We have met a couple of times. I included her in the book that I wrote about the Walker Building. I did an Arcadia book called Madam Walker Theater Center and Indianapolis Treasure. And I tried to include some of the, more recent performers. So there are a couple of pictures of Angela Brown performing at the Walker Theater.
She was a guest on this podcast, and, it was just fascinating to hear, all the people she's met over the years, including Maya Angelou, who was actually a fan of hers. And so in any case, but Back to Madam Walker. So talk about the pipe organ that she had installed in her home.
When Madam Walker moved into Villa Lawaro, it was in the spring of 1918, May of 1918. And in all of their homes, the home in Indianapolis that used to be at 640 Northwest Street, the Harlem Townhouse on 136th Street, and then Villa Lawaro in Irvington, New York, in Westchester County, all of their homes had Victrolas, had pianos, and had organs. And in this case, at Villa Lawaro, she wanted to have the top organ for homes of wealthy people. And so she ordered a Kilgan organ from Brattleboro, Vermont. This was sort of, standard operating procedure for the homes of wealthy people to have an organ. And she had this organ installed, and it was installed in such a way that the pipes went all through the house. So on every floor of the house, if someone was playing the organ in the music room on the first floor, you could hear it on the second floor and on the third floor.
Hmm. Hmm. What happened to the organ?
The organ's still there. It's still in the house.
Really?
The house is still there. Now,
Oh,
the
well,
organ has not worked in many years, but the organ is still there, and you can go down in the basement and open up the doors and see, the guts of the organ.
and do they do concerts there still, or someone, or
So,
who?
so the house is now owned by Richelieu Dennis and his family. Richelieu was the founder of a company called Sundial Brands, a hair care company, and he actually some years ago bought the trademark for Walker products. So Sundial under Richelieu began to own that product. We've done a couple of experimental lines with the product, but Rich then sold Sundial brands to Unilever, and he used some of the proceeds from that sale to buy Essence and Essence Festival, to create a venture capital fund that really seeds Black entrepreneurs, and his family foundation bought Villa Lawaro. And so
Okay.
it's undergoing a major renovation now. And there are occasionally some events there, but there's the major renovation is still more than a year away. But the idea is to be able to have small events at the house.
Is it a complete restoration of the old, or are they going to contemporize it?
No, 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 not contemporize it. No, it's through the National Trust for Historic Preservation, through their African
Of
American Cultural
course.
Fund, there's an easement that requires that things be preserved. And we're really fortunate that so much of the interior has been preserved, from the beautiful floors to the light fixtures to the hand painted ceilings. So the house is really intact.
Mhm.
Through the years, the various owners have done some updating. But when you have a house that's more than 100 years old, there's a lot
Sure.
that needs to be done.
Sure. When you were doing your research, of course, for our audiences, again, for those who aren't aware, talk about your first book.
So my very first book was a young adult book about Madam C.J. Walker that I did for Chelsea House in 1991. And it was the first biography of Madam Walker, which is stunning. But when we know the history of the publishing industry in America, there was not always a lot of interest in stories about women and people of color. They were considered, not very marketable. But we now know that that is not true. But 1991 was when Madam C.J. Walker, Entrepreneur, was published by Chelsea House. And then in 2001, I wrote On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker. That was published by Scribner. And that was really the first major biography of Madam Walker. Since then, I've written another young adult book that's published by an Indianapolis publisher, Cardinal Publishers. And I've also written a book for Arcadia, which is a book of 200 photographs that focuses on the Madam Walker Legacy Center.
And when will your new book be published?
Tentative pub date is June 2025.
Hmm. Well, of course, we can't have this conversation without discussion of the Netflix series
Hmm.
based on your book. I reached out to you when I started seeing signs around town at bus stops. There was a marketing campaign. And it just, wow, it made me feel very emotional because when we first met, of course, you know that I did a special for Channel 6, and that was the first, interest anybody had regarding the story. But Black history in general, Aaliyah, I still remember, you've heard this story before, but I first encountered the story through Judy Wall, who was the first Black television executive in Indianapolis. She was a mentor of mine, former teacher at Crispin Attucks, very well respected. And she was the one who first told me about the story. And she suggested that it might make a good special at the time. And, I thought about that if it had not been for Judy Wallace. She actually was very influential. And, you were in television. So, having someone in her position, she wielded some power. And I don't think that people realize what a big, huge difference that she made in this community. But she gave me a brochure about the Madam Walker story. And I thought about all of that, the roots of, what finally has come as a result of your book. But, there was a time when the Indiana Historical Society had no interest in Black history, and it was relegated to people like Violet Reynolds with a shoebox of Madam Walker's artifacts. And now look at it. I mean, those things that, and you're familiar with most of her artifacts, I'm sure. You probably handled a few. You probably have some somewhere, but I mean, don't you just savor all that's happened since this all began?
Absolutely. And what year was the documentary?
I would say in the 70s, mid 70s.
Hmm. Right.
Hmm.
Yes, yes. And that was very early because, and Stanley Nelson's film, $2 in a Dream, didn't come until 1989.
Yeah.
So that was, so you really did some of the real important original work that, especially in Indianapolis, that helped people understand the importance and some
Oh,
ways to get Mrs. Reynolds to to sort of begin to let go of the grip.
well,
Because
I learned early on that it was actually Judy Wall who taught me about a good personality goes a long way. I charmed Violet Reynolds. That's what I did, actually. No,
I'm sure you did because that was what was required.
we became actually became friends. So, we both loved one of the soap opera, I think it was Guiding Light, and we were both fans, and we became friendly. And of course, by then she had a great family, but she lived alone, and I knew she was going through some loneliness, and so she was a grandmother figure to me. But I would call her, we would talk about our soap opera. And then, of course, when she asked me to be a pallbearer, oh my gosh, that's still one of the biggest honors of my life that she
Mhm.
included me in that manner. But again, Violet Reynolds, I'm sure you spent time with her, did you
Of
not?
course, of course. I mean, my mother worked in the building. And Violet was my neighbor, so I would see her driving in her Thunderbird, going 10 miles an hour
Oh, and
past my
going
house on a regular
her
basis.
home, I think it was Grandview and the
Yeah, on
gold
Grandview, right. So
in
we were at
the
6222
so-called,
Grandview, and she
that's
was at
right,
64th and Grandview.
the so-called Golden Ghetto.
Yes, the so-called Golden Ghetto.
And,
But I will say this, to your question about what has happened in the interim, we all owe Violet Reynolds a great debt for shepherding, preserving, stewarding those papers that were in the Walker Building. And between you and Tom Roomer, who was at the Indiana Historical Society, this was a sort of, building a friendship, romancing Mrs. Reynolds in a way to get her both to tell the story and then to get Tom Roomer and the folks at the Indiana Historical Society to persuade her to allow our estate to donate the papers to the
Mhm.
Indiana Historical Society. And I wrote an article for Traces when the Madam Walker exhibit was at the Indiana Historical Society a few years ago
And
about
I saw you there opening.
right.
Yep.
And this article for folks who, can go online and find Traces, I really talked about the importance both of the Lilly money at the Indiana Historical Society and Miss Thornborough's role in mandating that they would have a more diverse collection. Because as we know, historical societies until the 1970s and sort of the explosion of Black history and women's history and ethnic studies did not really have an interest in papers, collections that had to do with people other than very wealthy white people. But Thornborough really, who's the historian, and her sister, who was the secretary at the Historical Society, really teamed up to try to diversify that collection. And now, of course, the papers that Mrs. Reynolds saved, more than 40,000 documents, have been digitized and are available online at the Indiana Historical
Oh
Society.
my goodness.
So there's, all of those papers that are there, the major exhibit that happened a few years ago. And I am told that it is the most requested collection that they have. And that's Benjamin Harrison and all kinds of other people who are in the Historical Society, but this is the most requested collection.
And to your knowledge, are there researchers who come from all over the world to the
Yes,
Historical
there are people.
Society to
There
to
are
hand
people.
to get their white gloves on and handle all those papers, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I
And in
love that.
October, um, Tyrone McKinley Freeman and I are going to do a program for Indiana Historical's Founders Day on October 17th,
Mhm.
talking about how we have used the collection. So, of course, I used it for all of my books. Madam Walker's letters, F.B. Ransom's letters, Amelia Walker's letters, photographs, ledgers, business records, sales receipts, all of those things helped inform my book. And then Tyrone McKinley Freeman, who, as your audience will know, is a professor in the School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, also used the papers to write his wonderful book, Madam Walker's Gospel of Giving, that really
Mhm.
does a deep dive into her philanthropy.
I have to constantly remember that it was you, Alelia, though. It was you who got the ball rolling in terms of giving this story international attention. International. And, the lovely thing about this podcast, by the way, is I now have a national audience because I'm on the internet. And, I even have folks in Africa who listen to this, which I love. So I try as often as I can to bring on guests like you. But even in Africa, I'm sure you've been there, have you not? And they know the story there.
I love this that so many people are inspired by Madam Walker, whether it's in India or Brazil or France or,
And they do, and
Nigeria.
it is an international story now, is it not?
It is. It is. And you had mentioned the Netflix series, so I will talk to you a bit about
Oh
that.
yeah, well, the Netflix series, you and I have spoken about it, and I know that one thing I've always known about you, you're very measured in terms of your critiquing things that, well, it's business. I know this, and I know everybody was trying to get you to like, what'd you really think of the Netflix series? And I knew that you were not able to. Okay, so where are you at this point? Can you actually say now about what you thought?
Yes.
So, like, let's hear
Yes,
it.
no, absolutely. So the series came out in March 2020, and it was the first weekend that people were sequestered because of COVID. So
hmm
it got a big audience, and it got a big audience. I got so many DMs in Portuguese from people in Brazil. So people were watching it all over the world. And I wrote an article for the website, The Undefeated, which is now ESPN, which is now called Andscape. And it's pinned to the top of my account on X. So if people want to do a deep dive into how I felt. But what I say in that article, I wrote that a few months after it came out. And at that point, I could be more candid. But I really did hold my fire leading up to the series and right after the series because so many people had worked so hard on that, whether it was the set designers, the hairdressers, the makeup people. Octavia Spencer was fabulous. It was lovely to have, the actors who were there who really cared. But I did not want me to become the story. And so I held my fire. But once it had come out and once other people had started to speak up, then I felt more comfortable because I did not want to rain on somebody's parade. But here's my thought about this. I was very excited when my book was optioned for this. I had been through five or six, at least options before, things that fell through. That's just sort of the nature of the beast with Hollywood. And then finally, in about 2016 or so, it was optioned. Then Octavia Spencer was attached to the series, and I was very excited about that because I was looking for hidden figures. you know, I feel like I got more Housewives of Atlanta, even though she was great. And some of the other people, it was wonderful to have Blair Underwood as her love interest.
Mhm.
But where things made a left turn for me, once the head writer and the showrunners were attached, they were all Black women, but we had a really different vision of telling Madam Walker's story. And I'm sorry to say, they actively excluded me from the early meetings with the studio so that they could have their approach. And their
Mhm.
approach was to focus on what I thought came off as a cat fight between Madam Walker and Annie Malone. And they made it
Exactly.
about colorism. They made Annie Malone, who was an equally important business figure, into a drug addict. So there were those kinds of things that I was cringe when I would send notes. I would say, this is just, the first version of the script that because here now, so let me just give this little footnote. When the contract was signed, um, I had what was called script review. As a writer of a book, it's very rare that you get any kind of veto or anything. So that's not, you don't expect that. But I had script review. So that meant they had to send me the scripts, even though they did not want to, but they had to send them to me. So I got to review them. The first version of the script they sent me had Madam Walker and Annie Malone calling each other the B word and the N word because
Oh,
they thought they were going to be contemporary and hip. And I just said,
oh,
Black women in the early 20th century, it's not like they didn't throw shade, but they were sophisticated
oh.
about it. They didn't do that, would not have happened. And so that annoyed them. And so so we had a contentious relationship throughout the scripting process.
I can
Two
imagine.
things that sort of stand out for me. There are many things that bothered me, but the two other things.
Yeah.
Um, FB Ransom, as you know, and as in Indianapolis audiences know, but others maybe nationally may know, FB Ransom was Madam Walker's attorney and general manager. He was a total straight arrow. He had taken a vow at 12 years old to never drink, smoke, or gamble. And instead, in the Netflix series, the head writer and showrunners created a fictional character named Sweetness, who was
Mhm.
supposedly FB Ransom's cousin, who was not just a numbers runner, but a pimp. So can you have like all the stereotypes of Black men? So that bothered me. And it had him betting on the numbers, and that helped finance the company. That most people would not notice the nuance of that, but I did. And I thought that's just so dishonest. And then they created a girlfriend for Alelia Walker. If she
Mhm.
had a girlfriend, that would have been fine with me. But they were very sneaky about it. And they had the producer, who was a white guy who I thought was much more in tune with me than they were. They had him ask Alelia, what does she think about us exploring Alelia Walker's sexuality? And and so I'm like, this was a phone call. And I said, well, it's the 20s. People are experimenting. I'm assuming that I'm going to have additional conversations with them to see where they're going to go with it. Instead, several months later, I get the script, and it has Bricktop, who was a famous blues singer,
Mhm.
as Alelia Walker's girlfriend. And I said, I met Bricktop, and she was performing at Fiorello's near Lincoln Center. And when I met her, and I was introduced as Alelia Walker's great granddaughter, she informed me that they were not friends. So I just said, you're going to take a lesbian out of the air and create this, and it didn't exist. And I said, you may think you can get away with this, but somebody is going to know besides me. And so then they changed it to like an entirely made up character. But I mean, it's for me, it's insulting that they're just checking off a box.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind is the old artistic license issue. for it to like sell to television audiences, younger people, we got to spice it up. We've got to create some drama where there's no drama. So to make it entertainment, we need to use our artistic license and come up with some devices that'll keep people glued to the set. And they always give you the argument that people's attention span is like a pea, and it's true.
And I absolutely, as a person like you, as a person who worked in television and in news for 3 decades,
Yeah.
I
I,
totally get that you have to spice things up, and I'm fine with spicing things up. But I guess where I draw the line is that you to not do something that is like 180 degrees different
well,
from the
I
actual
think they
person.
did you a tremendous disservice. They did a tremendous disservice to Black people everywhere. The way they created and just enhanced those stereotypes. I was just disgusted with it. And I'm glad I can say that as a having my own history with the story. I was so disappointed. But, I'm thrilled to know that Hollywood is going to be knocking at your door. And I hope this time you have some control. Do you?
Yeah, yes, you and I are on the same page. I really do believe that this is the Amelia Walker story is made for television, is made for a series, or is made for a movie. And yes, this time around, I hope that I will have more juice. Things, the dynamic and with streaming has changed a lot, but it's just such a delicious story. And I think, just deserves to be told. I mean, how
And
can you
I
lose
bet
the
and
20s?
it's just going to live on and on and on. And I just bet you there's going to be a musical too. I'm surprised the musical about Mad Walker hasn't. I know that a lot of people have been trying to make that happen. If that does happen, will you have anything to do with it?
Yes, and and actually, I have for a few years ago, I was having some regular conversations with a Broadway producer, and we thought that that was going to happen. It has not happened yet, but definitely it is. It should be a musical. Amelia Walker's already, been. She was in what Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, George Wolfe, and she
Mhm.
was in Sophisticated Ladies, that was on Broadway. So she's, there's always this kind of teasing reference to her parties, and I think now when my book Joy Goddess, Amelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance comes out, that
Mhm.
will open up a lot of doors. In fact, when the galleys are available, I probably at the beginning of next year, I'm hoping
And
that my agent will share that with some producers.
you know what? Black actresses, there are so many that are in the spotlight now. I'm loving it. I don't know about you. I'm loving it. I'm
Absolutely.
not only actors, but designers, people behind the scenes, writers, producers. There's no turning back. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, certainly can't even keep up. There's so much talent, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. So this is, for all of the challenges that anybody in Hollywood has, this is really a golden age, and people have their talent is coming to the fore. I'm very excited.
And I'm sure it does your heart good like it does mine because what we also share in common, you at a much higher level, your days at ABC and your work in network television supersedes my time in local television at Channel 6. And this podcast, I feel like I've come full circle in this market. But I guess you could say the same thing. I'm so excited to see what's going on in broadcasting as well. Without going into politics, it just did my heart great to see Lindsay, who got her start here at Channel 13, hold her own in that national political debate that we both know about.
So proud of her. And listen, I will tell you, I became aware of Lindsay Davis on one of my visits to Indianapolis. My brother, Lance Bundles, my late brother, said to me when I was, staying at our family house with him, he said, "You really should check her out. She's very good." And that was 2006.
You would know.
Well, no, but I have to say, my brother is the one who said, check her out, because he was a hard critic.
No, I
But
mean, once you saw her, you could tell that she had the goods.
absolutely. And coincidentally, the National Association of Black Journalists met in Indianapolis that summer, the summer of 2006. And there had already been some conversations with ABC with her. I had just resigned from ABC in early 2006, but I was in Indianapolis for the NABJ convention. And the person who was at that point the director of talent recruitment and development interviewed Lindsay in Indianapolis during NABJ. And then she went on to join ABC in 2007. So
Mhm.
I have to say she would have been successful no matter what. But I've just always really appreciated my late brother for pointing her out to me, and she has soared.
And speaking of soaring, I just have loved watching your career. You're really in demand. I don't know how you keep up with it. Tell me about what your schedule's like.
So for the last, so I left ABC News in 2006. So that's almost 20 years ago. It's hard to imagine that I've been gone that long. And when I first left, I knew that I was going to be writing this book on Alelia Walker. So that's how long I've been working on this book. But in the meantime, I did a lot of kind of volunteer things, Board of Trustees at Columbia and National Archives Foundation Board, and some other things that I hadn't been able to do when I was working in news. And that kind of filled up my schedule. So the book became like on the side. Now that I finished some of those leadership roles, the book is back in the forefront. So I've finally been able to finish this biography of Alelia Walker. And that's what has really consumed me for the last few years.
So it is finished and
It is
ready.
finished. It is finished. The manuscript is finished and my editor has approved it. But so I do that. I do some speeches, some speeches about Madam Walker, but it's mainly I've been working, writing
Yeah.
and editing.
Well, but you're also still the keeper of the flame. Let's talk about your work here in Indianapolis. There's also national attention focused on the Madam Walker Cultural Center, of which you're still involved in. And by the way, that's another association you have. Briefly, I was on the board of the Walker Theater, and I don't know if you know that one of the specials that I produced was on the building itself. I did a half hour on that back in the 70s, a few years after the piece on Walker. So I'm intimately familiar with the legacy. Called the Legacy Center, correct?
Right, right.
So what is your role with them now?
So I'm no longer on the board. I have not been on the board of the Madam Walker Legacy Center for more than 20 years. But I found myself so involved with a variety of things in Indianapolis. And I started coming back regularly in 2018 and 2019 because my brother Lance was sick. He had cancer. And so I was there every few weeks.
And he passed, did you say?
Yes, he did.
I'm
He did.
sorry to hear
But I
that.
but I started becoming more involved and seeing how much Indianapolis had changed. And I'd been on the Walker board, I'd been on the School of Philanthropy board earlier, but had not had direct involvement. But during COVID, there was that proposal for the building, a Buckingham development that was going to go in the 700 block of Indiana Avenue. When that began to happen, I just found that, objectionable, I have to say. And so I became involved with Claudia Polly and Mike
Yes.
Davis and others and Paula Brooks and others, the Reclaim Indiana Avenue folks, who really objected to that. And that kind of pulled me back in. I don't know what will ultimately happen with the 500 block and the 700 block. I know there's a building now going up in the 500 block, but it made me aware of just how fragile that history is. And so from that, I then became involved. Went on the board of Indiana Landmarks and on the board of the Rethink Coalition. I had been involved for a long time with the Indiana Historical Society. So I just have found myself trying to use whatever platform I have, and at this stage in life where I can say what I think, to speak up.
Good for you. The Claudia and I go way back as
I
well.
do.
Claudia Polly, and we have renewed our friendship, and I'm just having such a great time. We see each other socially, but, she's told me all about her work with that organization, which she is no longer with formally.
That she created once we moved on from the group that was opposed to that building.
That's right. And I
Created this
think
group.
it's because of that organization that, Purdue is intentionally building something there that will honor the neighborhood. Is that correct?
Well, interesting to see what happens. There's a building that's in the place where there was a law firm on the other side of the Vonnegut building that really was owned by the Madam Walker Legacy Center. And the current board decided that they were going to sell two parcels of land in order to satisfy some debt. And the parcel in the 500 block is being developed by Purdue.
Have you seen the beautiful new cultural trail that runs past there?
I came for the dedication of the cultural trail. It's really lovely. I mean, I so appreciate Karen Haley and the folks at the cultural trail, the folks who are doing the street signage, who are very gracious about involving me in these milestones for the history of Madam Walker.
I would like to invite the executive director on the show to talk about at least the theater. I'm really interested in what's going on. I was there to see Angela Brown do Yardbird at the Walker Center. It was fantastic. It should be on Broadway. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't already. I don't know if have you seen it? Do you know what I'm talking?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, about Charlie Parker.
Wow.
Birdland, isn't it?
Right.
And it's an opera based on his life. It's just outstanding.
And is she the original person doing it?
Yeah, I do believe she originated the role. It's just been done regionally, but I think it's fantastic, and to see it there. And he played that theater, you know.
Really?
The Walker. Oh yeah, who didn't?
Right. No, what during the day that was. Yeah, well, and I think that Christian Strickland, who's the current executive director, is doing a good job of bringing in interesting acts. So I think that with this renovation that really was facilitated by the Lilly Endowment giving a large donation, and the fact that the Indiana University actually does the maintenance and some of the booking, is a better business model. It was always, the Walker Theater was always a hard business model from the time of the renovation in 1980, because the theater is a certain size. You can only charge so much for a ticket. And the leadership could never, I think, though they try, quite get the pieces together to have sponsorship. And you just cannot have a season at the Walker if it's not subsidized by sponsors.
Exactly. And, I run a cabaret company, and I have for 10 years. So I certainly have an understanding about all of that. If it's a not-for-profit model in general, how it's always about fundraising. And it's
Right.
like, that's always been a problem. And even when I was on that board, there was a lot of dysfunction and disarray. But I think that had a lot to do with just the structure of it all. And I don't know if they've changed that model or not.
And when I was still on the board, I really argued for changing the structure, because in some ways it had been, I think, with the best of intentions, to try to have community organizations to have slots on the board. In theory, that's great. But community organizations can't help you raise money.
No.
You have to have corporations. You have to have representation.
Old money,
people
new
who have money.
Old money and new money. You
Mm-hmm.
got to have that. So, there are a lot of people in this town who are really proud of you and what you've been doing with your career. And now you're only going to get more attention, which you deserve when this new book comes out. And I, for one, cannot wait to read it. One thing I learned while working in television and doing those TV spots, I loved rooting around in the museums. I got to know all the librarians. That was key. And of course, now we have Google. We can do our work and we just dial it up. But I've always been so thoroughly impressed with your research. I mean, do you love research? I guess you
do.
What do you love about it? Detective work?
Just discovering amazing pieces of history and trying to make these people come to life. And in some ways, it's a challenge to the narrative that you and I were learning when we were growing up, that who we were was not included in the books.
Mm-hmm.
Your ancestors, my ancestors, like we didn't exist.
No.
And I just love challenging that.
Mm-hmm. So storytelling, as always, obviously, that's been the through line of your career as a journalist.
Absolutely. And, and I will say it was my grandfather probably who planted those seeds. So
Hmm.
my grandmother, May Walker Perry, was Alelia Walker's adopted daughter. She died in 1945. And my grandfather, when I was growing up, lived in the apartment on North Street. And the building is still there, 213 North Street, I think it is. And my mother and I would go visit the apartment. And my grandmother had brought back Alelia Walker's clothes and books and silverware and china and linen and all of those things. They were in the apartment. So as a little girl, I began to discover these things before I had any idea who these women were. I would go in my grandmother's bedroom and open the dresser drawer and find mother of pearl opera glasses or little miniature charms she brought from Cairo in 1922. So I was starting to feel their stories. And then my grandfather was a great storyteller, and he had been an attorney, and his family, his grandparents and parents were both accomplished people. They were college graduates, and his father was valedictorian of his class at Lincoln University in 1883. So he had a great pride in his history. So he's really the one, I think, who planted those seeds of being interested in history for me.
You bring up something really interesting, and I think it could make a great book. And I haven't seen anything, I may be wrong, about the Black middle class. I continue to educate people about Indianapolis is well known for those who are educated about such things, that has one of the oldest and largest Black middle classes in this country. Claudia Polly and I have talked at length about it, about Witherspoon and about Crispus Attucks, about, these groups of people highly educated, and yet the stereotype still remains, and just people don't have a clue. And, that's hopefully, as people learn history. But do you have any awareness of whether anything has been, this
Yeah,
has been?
actually, yes. There's a surprising amount that's been written, but it's not necessarily well distributed. But there's one book in particular called Black Society by Jerry Major, Gerri. I'm sure it's not still in print, but she was the society editor for Jet magazine in the late 40s through the 50s and 60s. But she very much appears in the new book because she was the society editor for a Black newspaper in New York and a very good friend of Alelia Walker. So she chronicled it. But there are other scholars and people who've written about the Black middle class. And I will say part of the theme in Joy Goddess, Alelia Walker and the Harlem Renaissance, is really looking at this Black elite, what it meant to be Black and wealthy and educated in the early 1900s. And it's a story that, I am kind of obsessed with this, desire to ban books and ban teaching accurate history, because if you don't understand, if you don't know these stories, then it allows people to think only the stereotypes. And I feel that I'm part of the generation, having grown up, having gone to school in the 1950s and 1960s, where those stories were erased, but then being the beneficiary of all of the ethnic studies, women's studies, queer studies that were beginning to blossom in the 1970s and 1980s. And so now there are literally hundreds of books about people who were not included in the canon prior to 1970. And you can't erase that, but there are people who do not want us to learn it. Because if you don't know something, if you don't think people have any accomplishments, it's very easy to dehumanize them and to say that they're eating cats.
Yeah. When we were speaking about representation, you are in the vanguard of this country, storytellers. But now there are so many more storytellers in all these other mediums, television and film. We're getting to see all these incredible stories
Instagram and TikTok.
and of Black life,
Right.
of real people. I mean, it's extraordinary that those stories are finally being told. I consider you a trailblazer and a pioneer in a big way. So,
Well, I will just say, when you're talking about being in the theater, art is what keeps us going and what gives us hope. And even when we're, in the midst of, political turmoil, artists are still creating and
mhm.
really pushing back and declaring that we're human, that we are creative, that we make contributions, that we're worthy.
And I can't imagine there aren't a lot of your colleagues. We're going to see a stream of books like the one that you've written about Madam Walker
Yeah,
and her daughter.
there continues to be an explosion despite the sort of backlash to telling the stories, despite the desire to not teach AP African American history, despite this push to ban books. There's still people creating that. You cannot stop that because the creative mind is going to do that. I'm just through the end of this year, there are at least 8 biographies of Black women that friends of mine have written that are sort of making it on the scene. And that's just that small genre. But the
Mhm.
stories are being told.
Yeah. So what's the next book?
Oh, no, no more books.
Really? That's what you say
I would
now.
listen, Tom, I want to go to the theater.
Well,
I have to tell you, so and I'm really, people say, oh, you know, I don't believe you. You're writing another book. No, I'm 72 years old. A book
uh-huh.
takes me at least a decade. I do not want to be 82. So what
Yeah.
I want for my next decade, I want to travel and visit friends. I want to see my godchildren and their children. I want to read the books that are unread on my shelf. I want to
Mhm.
do my bucket list of places that I haven't been. And then
Yeah.
I want to not have any obligations.
As part of these years doing the other projects that you've been doing, has that taken you any travel across the sea?
A little bit. I mean, I did for this book, I went to Paris and London. Let's see. It's not, I went to Cuba, and that was
Mhm.
sort of on a trip. But Amelia Walker went to Cuba in
Yeah.
1917.
Okay, my friend, and I am privileged to call you friend. This has been great to catch up. And so, when are you coming to town next?
So I will be there October 17th. Tyrone McKinley Freeman and I are doing the Founders Day program at the Indiana Historical Society. I think it's 6 p.m.
Okay, and it'll be at the Historical Society.
Historical Society.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, keep me posted about what's going on in your career. Well, I can, you're on social media. You're pretty active, aren't you?
Somewhat, but it's such a, I mean, I thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you for reaching out. And I love that we have this Madam Walker tie for so many years.
I've been very fortunate to have a really great career, but you'll find this interesting. I did a lot of work at Channel 6 and I made so many connections and friendships in the Black community because at the time, there was Barbara Boyd. She was the queen bee of media. She was the first. She's a legend. She's lionized to this day, and she's still out there.
He's still
Uh,
out there.
but I was in a position to be a storyteller through these specials that I produced. And because of Judy Waugh and also my other mentor, Faye Williams,
Oh, yeah.
well, I'm very proud of the fact that these two African American women, I felt it was important for me to return the favor by telling Black stories. And
Love
because
that.
there was only a handful of Latinos in Indianapolis at the time. And so after the Walker story, I realized there's a gold mine here of subject matter that had not been touched. And there was no interest in it. And that just really deeply offended me because of my own,
Right.
growing up, being as a gay man, as a Latino, I know what it's like to be marginalized. And if you're in a position, a platform like something as powerful as television, I knew that it was incumbent on me to do that. And so I did. And, I'm so grateful for all of that. I'm really proud of it, actually. So,
Well, and I think the Historical Society has been trying to do a better job of telling stories about the Latino community in Indianapolis. I don't know if you've
I've
noticed.
been interviewed. I'm in their archives. They also came to me and asked me if I would donate all of my papers, videos, films for my whole career. So they have a collection of my stuff.
Wonderful. When I say that I grew up in Indiana, they're like, are there Black people in Indiana? So I'm sure you must get the same thing. It's like, yes.
Well, yeah, I get the same thing, but now that's changed. I live in Hallville on the west
Mhm.
side. So does Claudia, by the way. We love the fact that this is the next new neighborhood. And all of my neighbors are mostly Latino immigrants. And it just blows my mind that when I moved here, you could count us on your 10 fingers. And now you hear Spanish in the streets, and there are these mercados and taquerias and restaurants. And, it's just like, I love it. It's changed the face of Indianapolis,
Well, you'll have to take me to some of those places.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. I mean, in my own neighbors, they're from all the states of Mexico, Guerrero and Guanajuato and Mexico City. And it's just hard for me to fathom. And it's exciting because, as you know, these people are going to contribute to this country. These people, the immigrants, will contribute like our grandparents did, and well, at least mine, not yours. Yours were brought here forcibly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well,
So,
my dad's family came there. Like so many Black people in Indianapolis in the early 1900s, they came from Kentucky, from rural Kentucky.
yeah.
So that's a thread that I like to pull too in telling stories. I mean, people know Madam Walker is the famous one, but I love all the other branches of my family as well.
How far back could you go in her lineage? You know?
With Madam Walker, though, I've been able to go way back in my mother's family and somewhat in my father's family, but with my mother's biological family, back to the 1600s, not the Africans, but the Europeans. But with Madam Walker, there really is kind of a dead end.
Yeah.
With her parents.
Yeah.
I have not been able to get farther than that.
Just no records. Nothing.
No records that I can find. And I know the white family, the family who owned her parents, I can find their ancestors and do that research. But her parents, I've not been able to go back farther than them.
I'm surprised.
1830s.
So no one's come forward.
Madam Walker's brothers only had like 4 daughters between all of the brothers, but none of those daughters had children. So the line really ends. And so if there had been other people, if, sort of there were descendants, then you might have some other ways to get at that story. But I really have hit a dead wall. And on Ancestry.com, I have more than 300 family trees, not my family, but all the people that I write about, the various characters in my books, and that's how I keep track of them. So I'm kind of a super ancestry user.
Well, that's so fascinating. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Entertainment Tonight on the red carpet when they make the film.
Yes, me too.
And
It's been great talking with you.
Sure you'll wear something fabulous. So
I hope so.
okay. Let's have lunch next time you're in town. And thank you again for fitting me into your schedule. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to this program.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
It's lovely seeing you. You look great.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.